just common sense.
So you brought up trash tokens. Don't hate me for it, but I was an econ student and I was in monetary theory class, and I would argue with my professor about the Federal Reserve because it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because you want a free market in every other market except for the market for credit where you set interest rates. So for instance, he would say, without the Federal Reserve, we can't fluctuate the money supply. So if there is an economic recession, we are beholden to that recession. Like the prices are going to spike or we might face deflation. Like we need the Federal Reserve there to protect us and to be able to move the money supply around as needed. Do you think that there is a reason for the Federal Reserve to exist in that function?
No. In this case, the failure, I think, to imagine how humans actually behave over time. Like it would make sense if it was a short-term situation, but it's the compounding nature of all of this that make it unwieldy, for the human mind to even contemplate. I think that's one of the important things here, is to just be sort of humble in the face of what can't be contained by human activity, right? The economy, it's a psychological engine, and it's more complicated than people can quantify. And the more things are manipulated, the less reference there is to anything real. So when you say that there's some need to paper over problems in the economy, there's no feedback loop. But if you remove the feedback loop by manipulating, in the end, it might look okay for the minute, but you'll end up creating systemic problems that you have to face eventually. And I think that's where America's at, right? You can't actually follow the money in the United States to the bad things America's done. And as a nation that prints the only real money in the world. And because of that, that's why the bill is sort of due in many ways, right? That's why you see people ignoring American influence more and more. What we have here is absolute zero accountability. And when you can't do the cost benefit, when you can't actually just measure things and you have no feedback, you can't manage anything. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And in the case of manipulation by a central bank, that's what I see, right? It's really just about them pretending to measure things to say they're managing them, but they're not really even measuring anything. And they've been manipulating this stuff for a while. Do you know that the Western legal or economic system, or whatever we want to call it, literally sacrificed the city of Hong Kong in order to stabilize this FATF thing that doesn't even bring prosecution? Like, it doesn't do anything, right? And what I mean by that is the excuse to allow Chinese mainland law to supersede Hong Kong law in the case of extradition. The argument they used was this FATF system, that because money laundering was happening in Hong Kong, they had to just give up and just not do it, right? Like they had to become Chinese. And that's what happened. That's the true story, the true and actual story. So the enemies of Bitcoin are already the ones that have sacrificed Hong Kong to the altar of compliance and fake measurement. And when you start talking about 2% inflation, what you are really talking about is a system that favors the financial engineers. Now, that is fine, perhaps over 10 or 20 years, but over 80 years of this, where every single capitulation in public policy was really meant and justified by the manipulation of these numbers, forcing everyone to become a financial engineer, forcing everyone to put a huge part of their mental cognition towards saving money, whereas saving money should just be the most basic low IQ activity you ever did. You should be able to offload all that cognitive effort and put it into being good at whatever it is, the thing you want to be good at, making chairs or pianos, or I don't care. And that ultimately is what it turns into. When they target this 2%, they're forcing everyone to keep up with them. They're forcing everyone to mind read them, to lip read them, to body language read them, which is what people end up doing, right? That's the whole Federal Reserve thing. Like, what did he mean? What did they mean? What did they mean?
That's fascinating, because I really relate to that, because if you have a stack of cash, what on earth are you supposed to do with it? You have to really think about it. You cannot just put it somewhere safe and go on about your day. you have to think about what is the best use for that cash, no matter how small it is, because if you sit on it, you're losing 5 or 6%, as you were just saying. So that's a really interesting way of saying that you have to become a financial engineer. You can't be just good at your day job. You have to play their game if it's going to lose its value.
And we're dealing with 80 years of that. We're dealing with 80 years of maybe the best engineer for whatever, right? Maybe the person who would have engineered a better battery has been stuck at Morgan Stanley making money hand over fist doing some weird leverage scheme. What did that do for anyone? And that's why you have the sort of unaccountable world we live in today. You're able to just equate power and influence with money, and then there's no feedback to how that actually gets created. But the good news is, I mean, it's one of the things that I think crypto is good at. It gets people to understand just how manipulated all this stuff is. It becomes clear for a lot of people what race they're really in. But then ultimately what you learn, I think anyway, is that the better answer is make savings easy again, and take away the premium at a systemic level. I think ultimately what we want to see is that there's less and fewer financial engineers, that it goes back to being the weird job that it was in the past. You don't want it to be nothing, right? But you don't want it to be the number one job of a generation again, for the 5th generation in a row.